lab out tremendously, so I thought if he could talk for a few minutes, it would be very helpful.
All right, so when Dad had asked me to do this, there's like varying levels of understanding of how digital works. And so honestly, I thought that I would just go very basic on this one. I wasn't sure, and Blake and I have already talked about later on we're going to do a more advanced one and go through a little bit more of the steps that we actually have to go through as a lab to design and go through a crown and accepting different cases from different scanners. I work with just about all if you send a scan in, basically I'm the one that's going to be accepting it, me or Katie, and helping to design it. So no matter what scanner you have, I'll be accepting it, I'll be using it, and I personally just absolutely love digital. I like digital scanning. I love that it's opened up so many different options as far as like materials and the new zirconias and peak and milled temporaries that are much stronger than the temporaries that we used to make. It's also gotten me into other hobbies like 3D design and stuff like that. That's an image I made. I just really love the digital world. It's just a lot of fun. I have been fortunate enough to work with basically all the big design softwares. So we have 3Shape, ExoCAD, and the Sirona software at our lab. And so it gives me some insight on which ones work better, and which ones I prefer as a lab technician. It's all debatable which one's the best one, but my personal preference, is 3Shape. I really enjoy 3Shape. My brother will actually argue that ExoCAD is better. So, everybody's got different, opinions on what works best. I've also had the opportunity to work with 4 different scanners. So we have 4 scanners. Actually, we have a fifth scanner now. But the 4 scanners that you see are now, we have a Sirona scanner up on the top. We have a 3Shape, the 900L scanner. We also have a Preciso Cam and the Nobel scanner. And so I've worked with all 4 of those scanners and learned how to use all 4 of them very well. But most of the time, if you send stuff into me, since 3Shape's my preferred scan software, I normally go through the 900L, the 3Shape scanner. The interesting part about these scanners is that I've had the opportunity to work with 3 different types of scanning, of ways of building meshes. So in scanning, there's multiple different fields that you can go into as far as scanning. It's not just dentistry, but for what we use, we actually are using 3 different types of scanning softwares to capture a mesh. So like a photogrammetry scanner is normally what you guys would have as far as like an in-office scanner that captures a bunch of different photos and then overlays those to build a mesh. And I'll show you guys a mesh later on. It's basically the digital impression that you send to us. We also use a structured light scanner, or as you probably may have read, a white or blue light scanner, which basically projects different geometrical shapes onto the object and then calculates the deviations and the shape. And then the laser too is the Nobel scanner. It's triangulation. It's probably the most accurate scanner. Unfortunately, it's also one of the slower ones, so we don't use it that often anymore. As far as accuracy goes, the photogrammetry scanner is probably the least accurate, going down to the most accurate, but we pretty much stay in the middle because those seem to give the best results. We also have 2 different mills. We have a 5-axis mill that we do most of our large implant cases with, because with multiple insertion directions, you need to have screw channels going multiple different angles, and a 3-axis mill just doesn't have the ability to do that. We have the 3-axis mill for basically general milling, for more like the temporaries that I had talked about and things like that. We did get into printing, which I had a lot of fun with, but we're not doing that anymore just because there's a whole new level, just a learning curve to that too that hasn't been working well. And with all the digital, we've made some pretty cool restorations. We've made, the big Prato-like bridges, all full zirconia, and I just really love this stuff. I just think it really opens it up to a lot of really new products. This was one of my favorite ones that I did. The case ended up turning out very well, but I do have to tell you that we don't do these anymore for the specific, for different reasons, and I'm sure Dad will probably mention some of them. Mostly because they're a lot of work, and when they do fail, the whole restoration fails. And so it's just very hard to watch something like that crack or chip or break, and repairing them's not really much of an option when you go full zirconia like that. Now with all this digital, you have a lot of problems too. Like I said, I absolutely love digital. I just, it's the coolest thing ever. I think it's so cool that you guys could send me a scan the same day I can get it. The same day, most of the time, I can design it and start pulling it through our design, you know, all of our production stuff and everything. But there's so many learning curves when it comes to the laboratory side, and I'm sure it's the same on the dental side. That's me actually working on our mill, on our 5-axis mill, because a lot of the times these companies don't have support on the lab side. And I know kind of from what talking to John earlier that some of the scanners, their support's not very good either, the intraoral scanners. So it's things that you have to think about when you're looking at scanners. And how many of you guys have scanners actually? I know a couple. Okay. So I think this will be good. So it does cause a lot of frustration. And I think that when people sell it, I think they oversell it. And so there's a lot of misinformation. So when you go into getting a scanner, when you're first getting into digital, I think that you're going to go in thinking that, oh, scanner, this thing's going to be awesome. It's going to do everything that I ever imagined it could do. And then what ends up happening when you fall out of the honeymoon stage or fall off of cloud 9 is you start realizing where it's actually workable. But it's not workable for every single case. It's still not 100% there. And I hope that you guys that have scanners would agree with that. I think that it definitely has a place, and I do actually think that it has a future in dentistry, and it probably will be mostly what we're doing in the future. Oh, all right, there we go. So I still do think that analog is the most accurate. I think that an analog impression cannot be beat, personally. I mean, you can tell the difference of the margins. These were taken at the exact same time. You can tell the difference between a digital model that was printed, you know, at 20 microns or whatever, 10 microns, and an actual impression. And the reason being is because when you take an analog impression, you get hydraulic pressure that pushes the impression material down below the margin. And so you get a nice margin like that. That's something I can trim even though the tissue is way up above where the margin is, right? This is a iTero model that we use. We do get several scans from iTero from a guy out of state. And you know, I think iTero is actually a great scanner, but the models, this is actually, okay, so this is a digital, this is a analog model versus an iTero model. I mean, you can tell there's rounding. You can tell on the analog, you can even see the burr marks that the dentist put in. And if you see burr marks on the iTero model, you're actually seeing what the mill, because they still mill their models, which is the most accurate way to make a digital model still. But they're not the actual burr marks that the dentist put there. They're the burr marks made by the actual mill in the milling process from iTero. And I mean, you can see it's pretty significant that it's getting rounded off. I tried to take it at the same angle. It was really hard to actually do. All right, so basically digital, whenever you're making a model or you're making a digital impression, it goes through basically 2 steps. You're gonna scan it, which creates a point cloud, which is a collection of data points called vertices. And then through a complex program, it ties all those together, not unlike the little point drawings in a process normally called surface reconstruction. And then you finally get your digital model. No matter what scanner you're using, no matter what type of scanner it is, it all does the exact same thing. That's what it does. And so this is what you eventually send to us. And I mean, you can see the surface of this is raw STL data, so this is what we actually receive. So the scan, if you take it out and put it into any other different software program and actually look at the raw STL data, which is what everything is made off of from our laboratory back to you, this is what we're making it off of. This is 6 veneers. I actually just finished this case this morning. So kind of looks like crumpled up aluminum foil in some spots. You can tell the veneer preps on the left are a little bit smoother, but you can see each individual face, right? And I know some of you guys are saying, well, it doesn't look like that on my end. It looks nice and smooth. Well, what the software does internally is adds a surface modifier, and it's a smoothing modifier. So it makes it look a lot nicer inside of your guys' programs. But what we actually receive is without the modifier. And the smoothing modifier is not something that, it's not making it accurate. It's just for aesthetic purposes, right? They both have the same meshes. You can tell the smoothing modifiers on the left and no modifier. They both carry the same wireframe. So let's look at a couple of scans. This is a trio scan, which I am a huge fan of trios. We get a lot of different scans though. The color I don't think it makes it more accurate, but it does help for some purposes. I don't think that the color is as accurate as you like taking a shade yourself, but it works just fine for what it is. You can tell it's pretty smooth, and then there's your wireframe, the mesh. So basically there's flat spots in between that. This is inside 3Shape, so it's nicely rendering the image to make it nice and smooth for us, right? But you can see the detail. I mean, basically anywhere that the margin's exposed, you have a pretty nice margin, a totally acceptable margin. Anywhere that the margin's slightly up against the tissue, you can see that you're losing it, like on the buckle there. And interproximally just ever so slightly, but for the most part, that's an acceptable scan. This is another trios. This one was very nicely, very much cord packed in there, so you can see the margin completely. This is a situation where they probably had slightly too much information, where you got that nice rough surface on the outside. That doesn't really affect the way the crown's made though. I'm not super worried about that. That's not going to make the contacts off. But you can tell in this situation, that's an actual nice scan. You can see all the detail in it. You can see the margin all the way around. As long as you're scanning, you need to make sure that what you're scanning is 100% visible, because the scanner does not scan below the tissue. This is an OmniCan scan. You can see that the surface of this one's smoother. This does not mean it's more accurate. This is something, I'm not sure what makes it actually smoother, because this is all inside of the same software. It's definitely a less accurate scan, and you'll see when we go to see the margin that it didn't even collect that distal margin or the interproximal margin, which are right at tissue level. And I wanted to show one more scan, which is a TrueDef. You said you had CareStream, right? Not TrueDef? Okay. I'm not overly fond of TrueDef. They're not, as far as accuracy, I mean, you can see there's a lot of detail there. But the meshes, you can also tell, are missing, I mean, in complete spots. There's holes and everything, right? Even on where the prep is. So this is the kind of stuff that we're seeing when you see us, when you send us an impression. This is what digital sends us. So
pictures of the actual regular impressions that you get, like the traditional ones that are just bad.
You're right. There are traditional impressions, and there's just as many. No, I 100% agree. There's just as many ways to mess up a traditional impression as there is for digital, and that's my whole point. Right? I mean, basically, you can do it good either way. And digital is industry standard right now. So it really doesn't matter what scanner you just saw. It's industry standard. They work, but there's definitely a place for analog impressions, and I still think that they're the most accurate. What were you going to say?
I don't have a scanner myself, but it's Sarah?
The Omnican, yeah.
Yeah. You were talking about too much information, and I understood that you could go over and over the same area, and it doesn't give you too much. It just, there's no benefit to going over and over.
After a while, yeah, no, you're right. There's not, because it connects them in a certain,
But
that's,
looking at what you're showing there, are we in danger of giving too much?
no, I don't think so. Not with the Omnican, no. So what I wanted to show you here is really quickly, basically what I did is I went inside of CAD software and I made this. I designed this structure because I wanted to do a visual experiment on our own scanner in our lab on the most accurate scanner that we have, the 900L. So inside the lab, I mean, I feel like you're going to get a better scan no matter what, because we're scanning. Basically, this was going to be model. It's a model puck, which is what you would mill models out of. And so I designed that. I took it into our mill. I took the residual data, which is the data that the mill can actually mill, and then I overlaid the two from the scan and the residual data. And so you can see I did cross sections with the cubes. You can see where scanning works well and where it doesn't. I mean, right away, just a visual observation is anytime you have a 90-degree angle, it's just going to round it off. Here you can tell in between the cylinders, it rounds it off instead of doing a straight line. That's another 90-degree angle. It can't do internal or external 90-degree angles. But I do want to point out that the cylinders are actually super accurate. And so where was that applicable? Well, if you're using scanning for doing implants, honestly, I think that that's a perfect place for it. Most of the scan bodies are rounded off everywhere, and they're tall enough to where you'll actually get a good scan. So in a situation like this, I think that it'll align very well. I think that on implants, I think that scanning is a very good place for that. More rounding, even more rounding. And then this, you can tell that it rounded off every little point on there. I've got a couple of dentists that swear that they get better results using the scanners, and most of the time I tell them that's because it rounds off every little point, and so basically you're getting a massive cement gap, which is fine. It really is fine. It's industry standard. It's not a big deal. The same situation there. So another thing that you're going to want to think about when you're looking for scanners is you're going to want to talk to your lab and you're going to find out what software they like to use. Because like I said, I mean, I really prefer to use 3Shape if I can. Inside of 3Shape, we actually have our own libraries that I designed that work very well. And so every time I design a crown on 3Shape, I very much feel like it's my crown. I'm very much connected to it. If you send us a scan from other scanners like the Sirona scanner, we're tied in on the in-lab, so we have to do it inside of that software. The same thing with the implant scan bodies. Does everybody know what an implant scan body is, for the most part? So when you place an implant, you'll put an implant scan body onto the implant, and then when you scan that, you'll align that, and that'll give your placement when you're designing it. Does that make sense, kind of? I should have showed it, I'm sorry.
We might want to mention there is that every implant system has their own scan body.
Well, and that's my next point. Depending on what scan bodies you guys use, we have to design it a certain way. So if you scan with Atlantis scan bodies or Astra scan bodies, we have to send it to Atlantis or Astra, right? Which is only a bad situation for us because that means with certain companies, they design their own abutments. So it ties our hands slightly. Whereas if you scan it with some third parties or Nobel, we can still design certain things at our office. So I mean, really, in a real quick, and like I said, this is a very, very quick overview of just digital and how digital works. I do think that there's definitely a place for digital. If you ask me which one's more accurate, I do still think analog's more accurate. I don't know how much longer that'll be. I mean, technology is going so fast with all this stuff that it could be next year. They could say, you know, it could catch up. I'm sure it will eventually. As far as convenience, I do think that the most convenient thing is implants because you can actually skip an entire appointment by scanning it and sending it to us when you place it. And so then you don't have to take a pickup impression or anything like that, or you don't have to do an open or a closed tray impression. You can just send it straight to us. I mean, price for the lab's a whole different story than, I know that the intraoral scanners are very expensive. For us, it took us a lot to get to the point where we were comfortable with how digital worked. We have 4 scanners, 2 mills, and a printer that we don't use anymore. Time, I do think it saves time in some aspects, and I do think it's a huge waste of time. Most of the time, it's me working late fixing certain things associated with digital dentistry. I do think it can save a lot of time as far as like pickup and return. But our return is just the same if you send us a digital model versus if we get an analog impression. Is there any questions? Yep.
What do you stay late to fix?
Most of the time it's the mill. Most of the time it's the mill are running some kind of thing on the 3-shape trying to figure out what's wrong with.
That's not what we're sending you.
No. Yep. It's a lot of times it's just hardware problems. Yep. Which is a problem. I don't know how the scanners work. I don't know if they break, but I know that support's just huge. So when you get a scanner, because I would guarantee you that everybody's going to have a scanner eventually. When you get a scanner, I think it's very important to make sure that whoever you buy it from is 100% behind it and close enough to where they can help you work through problems. Okay. Yeah.
I probably don't need
Well, he's
that. I was so glad. Oh, two for sure. So glad Barrett did that because that is not my expertise. I always tell the boys that I build finishing glazed crowns every day, which I've done my whole life. And I've taught classes all over the country for 25 years to other technicians on how to build finishing glazed crowns. So when it came to the digital stuff, I tried to get back on the scanner. My brain doesn't work like that at all. I'm a hands-on kind of guy. So with that said, communicating with your laboratory. I've kind of found that the most weakest things that I see with friends of mine around the country is they are afraid to talk to dentists. And I don't quite understand that because you guys are human beings like us. We're all trying to help patients, so we all got to work together. So my ambition tonight was to make sure that you kind of understand what lab guys need to help communicate. I mean, so you got your patient, you got you, and you got me. And between all 3 of us, we can get things done pretty well. It also increases efficiency by reducing remakes and chair time. Our ambition tonight was to talk about color communication, digital factors, which Bear just did, which I thought he did a great job, restoration materials and uses, which is very confusing for everybody nowadays, and I've got some handouts that I'll give at the end of the seminar, along with potential problems that our 60 years of experience has helped our dentist friends reduce their remakes and chair time to increase their efficiency and production. So 60 years, there's a lot of crap here. My dad started a business back in 57, 58, and this is his crew. A little different look than what we're used to now, but my dad's on the bottom left. These are almost all military guys. The young lady in the middle, she was 16 when my dad hired her. She just came to the lab the other day. They live in Michigan, and it was just really kind of mind-blowing, but it was great. So different look. This is our crew now. I told Bear on the way in tonight, I said, this is Gina, which is our office manager. All the rest are technicians. And with the 6 technicians, 2, 4, 6, right? We had 150 years of experience. So we've got a lot of experience on a very, very small laboratory situation. The other thing I've been trying to promote, because a few years ago when every time patients would come in, they would say, where's this crown made? I said, it's made right here. So we've really been promoting the made in the USA type thing, which I think is important because it makes people feel more secure because they've read crazy things about, what's in the metals, what's in the ceramics and all that. And I think it's good to know that a small laboratory, and if I ever did anything crazy, my dad would be flopping over in his grave, and I just don't want that to happen. So my dad's been gone about 22 years now, so it's just been us. The other thing I wanted to bring up, boutique places. They're small. They take care of their patrons a lot. They cater to their patrons, and I feel like this is why our laboratory has been around for 60 years. We don't appeal to everybody. You know, there's some guys and gals that just don't want to work with a small lab for whatever reason, but I feel like we offer what a lot of, and I'll say larger laboratories can't, because we do a lot of hands-on. We work very closely, not only with the dentist, but with their patients. Sometimes you have patients that are a little more difficult and you need help. I do a lot of consultations, I mean a lot, and a lot of in-lab shades, and Barrett does too, and I feel like that's where we are able to work really well for cases that are, if they're high-end cosmetic cases, if they're cases that patients are uncomfortable, but I think that's where we really stand out, and that's why we've been able to be in business for such a long time. You know, our crowns are handmade, and we're matched. It only fits one patient in the whole world. So, I mean, you can't get any more custom made than that, that's for sure. So, just bear that in mind with when you're working with any laboratory, by all means. And where do you start? My biggest probably communication downfall that I have between dentists, and a lot of times it's dentist or the assistant, doesn't make any difference. It's shade communication and what we need to do a nice job. You know, on a big anterior case, they might come down for a shade. Sometimes, you know, the patient's, you know, only in for a short time or they live far away and they want to take the shade, which is fine. But I kind of feel like if I can help you understand what we need for shade communication, it eliminates a lot of variables. And the biggest variable is everybody in this room sees color differently. If Kevin tells me, hey, Aim, put a little more yellow in my crown, a little more yellow to Kevin Thorpe and to me is entirely different. So we need a common denominator so we can communicate very well. And that's why I brought up all the eyes, because everybody sees things differently. Cones and rods, and we'll smoke through this. And I did read today that, and you guys might know this, we have 6 to 7 million cones for color, 120 million rods for dark and light perception. 1 out of every 255 women are color deficient, less than 0.25%. And 1 out of every 12 men. So somebody in here is probably colorblind. And I know there is, because a friend of mine I know is a little colorblind, and he's here tonight. So, so that probably works pretty well. Reds and greens are the most common color deficiency in human beings. And if you're seeing things funny now, it's only going to get worse. Our eyes are easily deceived. Color receptors fatigue in less than 10 seconds. And I'm going to show you a system that you can pick a shade in less than, maybe not 10 seconds, but pretty close. And it works very well. Influence the color of the room around you. We have our shade room is kind of a neutral gray color. We have all color, or like 5200 Kelvin lights in the whole laboratory and in the shade room, which helps. We have no windows in the shade room, which helps tremendously. Everybody used to think in the old days you had to have north-facing light. That's not true, because that would just influence your shades in a different way. Extraneous light from windows, lights, and room, even clothes. If your patient has on a red shirt, it will influence the shade. Medication and certain illnesses can affect color perception a lot. And color, it's influenced by drugs to treat heart problems, drugs for high blood pressure, drugs for treatment of infections, drugs for nervous disorders or psychological problems. Caffeine, nobody here drinks caffeine, right? No coffee? It affects your perception. Even Viagra, when I read that, I had to put it in the presentation. I don't know who's going to come in to me with a shade or anything with Viagra, hopefully not, but I just thought it was kind of a fun tip. So what do you guys and gals see there? Anybody care to say? Nice. All right. Rich, can you see anything? Okay, just checking. Can you guys draw a line from one side to the other? Everybody good? John? See you squinting a little bit. All right, everybody see this one? Good. How about all 4 of these? And I mean, all this is an awareness type thing, because if you have something and you know that you've got some kind of a color perception on different colors, then you know where you got to double check on things. And I love these things. If you stare in the center of this, watch how it all starts moving. And it's static, of course. It's not moving at all. It's your brain that's affected by your perception, and it'll make things start moving. So we're very easily deceived. So you've got to be very careful with what you're doing with shades. Did that move enough for you guys? Everybody got it? Okay, good ideas. This is probably the most important thing of all. Always take your shade before you start prepping. Use retractors or gloves to avoid shadows. That's really big too. And I know the retractors are a pain, but you got to get the lips up, otherwise they create a shadow. They will lower the value of your shade by at least one shade, one value. Yes?
You know, teeth are all in the mouth, they're different colors.
Absolutely.
Which one do you choose, the lighter or the darker? Or?
That's where talking to your patient is really important. If you're doing one central, obviously you're going to do the other one. If you're doing one lateral, if the other lateral's not bombed out, that's the one I match. I'm hard-headed German, both sides of my family. I'm very anal about things, so I try symmetry, man. I like symmetry. If you're doing a cuspid, if the other one's not bombed out, you want to match it. But you always got to ask your patient, because I've had patients come in before where I'm doing a lateral and the central's bombed out and the other central's bombed out, and they'll say, well, I'm going to do all my teeth eventually. And like, so I want OM1 on the lateral. Like, oh my God, you got to be kidding me. You know, so you're going to have like A4 and you got one OM1, because over the next 10 years they're going to get crowns on the other, you know. But you got to talk to your patient. It's very important. Metamerism. It's always a good idea to talk to your patient about metamerism. I just had a gal in the other day. She said, when I'm at the airport, my teeth look different in the airport bathroom. I don't know what kind of lights they got in the airport bathroom. So she comes in and talks to me, and I'm like, you know, incandescent bulbs kind of emit kind of a yellow cast. Fluorescent bulbs kind of emit a blue cast. You know, they all affect things differently. You could be standing next to a red car with a mirror, and your teeth will have a red tint to them. There's all these things that affect things. And of course, we're still trying to use man-made materials to make something that God made, which we'll never ever do. But we keep trying, boy, that's for sure. But you have to explain some of these things to your patient, because otherwise they're surprised and they don't understand. They think it's going to look just like their natural teeth. And we can make teeth look pretty natural too. First question, are they bleaching? This is a guy that came in. He wasn't bleaching when I took the first shade, and look where we're at. We're in the 5M1, 5M2. He came back 3 weeks later, and he goes, can you check my teeth again? And look at how it changed. So, if they want to bleach, that's great. I could sell more bleaching kits out of my laboratory. I just had a gal that came in today for a shade, and I said, she's like 22 years old. I said, have you ever thought about bleaching? Oh yeah, I want to bleach. Well, she's in for a shade for a central, and I said, well, now's the time to do it, because once you get that crown in, it's all over but the tears. And she goes, well, I want to bleach. And I said, go get a bleaching kit. I should be selling them things, because I bet you 2 or 3 times a week, people always want to bleach. You guys and gals need to just say to your patient, and sell those kits. They love them. But let them use it for a week. Let them sit still for a week without bleaching, and then have them call me to make an appointment to come in. Yes? It's usually 2 weeks. I've kind of learned that a week works pretty well, as long as they're, you know, if they stopped on a Sunday and they go to another Sunday, then Monday morning they call and come in, it's pretty good. But you can sell a lot of bleaching kits. Second question. Always, always, always. This is a prosthodontist friend of mine, and he knows better. And the bottom left corner, you can see, I'm gonna probably kill myself tonight. Okay, so we had 2 preps that were dark, which I didn't know. The center one, obviously being a zirconia abutment. Look at how orange this is. This is gray, this is orange. So I end up having to build the teeth differently. This one, the lateral doesn't look as good yet, and I tweaked on that, but I wanted to show that because it's very important to understand the underlying dentition will definitely affect a porous-infused zirconia crown. You know, some are worse, some are better, but you've got to give your laboratory what the prep shade is. You know, a picture, or just say, hey, it's an A4, or it's a C1. I don't care, just some kind of a visual indicator for us, so we knew what your prep is.
Do you care more about the snuff shade if it's like lithium disilicate, or, I mean, the zirconia is more opaque, right? So.
Yes, you're right, and that's a good question, John, because I'm not a real Emax kind of guy. Barrett and Blake really love Emax. I'm kind of a porous-infused zirconia kind of guy. I think it's the best restoration on the market, in my opinion. Lithium disilicate is much more translucent. So any of the underlying dentition, if you have 6 veneers and you got 1 dark prep, you got a problem. So you've got to make sure your laboratory knows that, because they can press it out of a different material, but it won't look the same. So there's always a problem with veneers, and it's a great restoration for veneers, but you have to know what you're working with so you can do it. I'm always really funny about Ame'S, because I let Barrett do them, because I just don't want to do them. They just frustrate me, because they don't do what I want them to do. I don't even like the porcelain. He doesn't like the porcelain either on the Ame'S, because it's just not as good. We use VM9, which is a Vita porcelain. Great porcelain. I could raise and lower the value all over the place with that and fix things so they look good. And you'll see that in a little bit here too. Oh, crap. Camera. Sorry, I don't know if I can go back or not. Oh, nope, I don't want to do that. Sorry, guys. Come on. Camera. Anybody got a camera? Good for you. That's probably the best communication tool you can do for your laboratory. And pictures for us, if it's not for the shade, at least for the characterization on the adjacent dentition, so we know what we're trying to match. The other thing, is anybody familiar with the polarizer that's out now? They've been out for, it's a little pricey, it's like 400 bucks for this kit. But you can see, look at how glassy the teeth are down there. Look at how matte they are here. It really helps you pick out a shade much more accurately too. And we've been using this for quite a while now, and it works great. So just, if anybody ever needs help with camera stuff, to set up a camera, get a camera, work with a camera, let me know. I could do a camera class all by itself, because it's a lot of fun, and it's probably the best teacher you'll ever have in your entire life, because you guys like us, we all work by ourselves, and when you get pictures and you see pictures of nice teeth, you need to show your patients those pictures, because that's you, and you need to pat yourself on the back that you're doing a good job. Do you have a good understanding of hue, chroma, and value? It's probably the best way to communicate with your lab guy or girl, because it kind of levels the playing field. What you start with, the system we use, it's a Vita system. It's a 3D master. It's actually a linear shade guide, but you've got value from white to black, which obviously that's not black, but you can tell there's a difference. You got hue, which is the actual color. And in this case, I only got red, yellow, and mandarin, because that's what the shade guide is based upon, because that's what they figured out. Most of your teeth have those characterizations in them, or those colors in them. And then chroma, which is nothing more than a diluted version of the hue. So obviously pink is a diluted version of red, and yellow the same way. So it kind of gives you an idea, but you've got to keep that in your head, because if you tell your lab guy you're low in value, right away he should know immediately, and he should know he's got to layer it with a higher value porcelain, which we do when we need to in the laboratory. Most of the mistakes we make are in the laboratory. This is probably the best shade guide Vita ever came out with. Dr. Paravina developed this. It's based off the 3D Master Shade Guide. Is everybody familiar with the 3D Master Shade Guide? Is everybody familiar with the Linear Shade Guide? No? And you know what? Vita's not selling them direct anymore, so you got to go through Zahn or one of the other places. If you need one, they're about 250 bucks now. They used to be like 125 until Vita decided to start selling them. Actually, if you call up your company, I don't know, you guys probably work with Shine or whoever you work with, they're going to tell you it's 480 bucks, and you got to say, no, there's no way that's 480 bucks. And if you have that problem, call me, because I can work something out. Because I still teach for Vita, Barrett teaches for Vita. We can get a better price through the dealer still, so I would definitely do that to help out, because it's the best thing on the market. And what you got, the top one, the dark color, and you could use that actually for a 17% gray card. This is the value guide. This is the first one you use. And we're going to go through a shade, and I'm going to show you the crown so you understand how well it works, because it works very effectively. So you've got, let's say you pick out a 2-in-1. So what are we seeing here? When you pick out a 2-in-1, the first thing you've got a value indicator of 2 on a scale from 1 to 5. So you're down the value a little bit. The middle M always indicates a hue, which in this case is mandarin, which is the M. Am I boring you guys? We doing okay? Okay, everybody's good? I didn't see anybody sleeping yet. Rich, you're still there, right? Okay. The one indicates the chroma intensity. Some shades have more than, they have 1, 2, and 3. Some don't, but in this case, this one does have 3. So now you've got You've got a 2M2, which is the same value, same mandarin, a little more chroma, a little more color. You got 2M3, same value, same color, and the 3 is the chroma level, so it's a little higher in chroma. So the shade guide is very simple once you understand. The 3D Master Shade Guide, which has them all in a row like that, that'll make you crazy. This shade guide is much better because it's much easier to use and it's much simpler. So what you've got, and always use on the shade guide, don't just hold up one shade guide. Always hold up 3. Because otherwise you're going to make your lab guy crazy. If you got 3, you have some parameters to work between. So in this case, we've got OM2, 1M2, and 2M2. Obviously that's a temporary on number 8, so we're trying to match number 9, and you can see that's pretty close. The 1M2 is pretty close, might be a little bit higher in chroma, but you should always write all 3 down. Pictures, if you could take a picture of that, that would be great. But just don't hold up one shade guide, hold up 3. Which is in that kit the way it is, you just move the shade guide around.
Abe,
Yes?
I noticed that most redheads are R's. Is that a true value, or is it a reflection
From the red hair?
color?
Nah, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know. I never thought about that. I know I got a friend that's up in Idaho, up in what they call desert, the high desert, and there must be a lot of titanium in the water. And he said their teeth are all translucent looking. So it depends upon your water. So red hair may have an influence on it. Well, I guess it depends on where the red is. There red hair around their head, and they got a full beard that's all red or something. And that would probably have an effect on it. But I'm not sure for sure. But what we're trying to do is hone this in a little bit better. 1M1's pretty darn close. Does that look that way to everybody? It's not perfect, of course, but pretty close. Again, pictures, always. Okay, so what you can do, and this is probably the best tool ever, take your shade guides. You could do it on your camera, or you could do it on your computer. You don't have to do Photoshop or anything. You just need to convert it to a black and white picture, and it makes your eyes see the value better, which you can pick out the shade better. These are all little tricks that we use all the time with all the patients we have come in that help us pick out a little better shade. Doesn't mean we don't make a mistake, but it helps a lot. Yes, sir.
When you're doing like thickness photos and that kind of stuff, and I'm shooting in manual mode, and like, how are my pictures?
Your pictures are great, John.
Color correcting them versus for you guys. Like, I might need to look at my histogram to make sure I'm not overexposed, or.
You know, you're right. That's a good point. If you're overexposed, it kills the color. If you're underexposed, I can put it in my computer, I can bring the color up a little bit, or I can bring the exposure up a little bit. If you're overexposed, it washes out all the color. The histogram is probably not a bad idea. If you can get the histogram so it's in the middle, that's great. You don't have to go to Photoshop. You don't have to use your gray card. You don't have to change all your colors. If you've got 3 shade tabs up there, my 3 shade tabs are pretty darn close to your 3 shade tabs. That's what I need to help communicate. But in this case, you can tell the central looks pretty good. That's when it was just first seated, so I'm sure it looks better now, but it's not bad. And you know, the only thing I want to keep pointing out on this, and this just makes me crazy, and I won't do it, and I got a fisheye in there, which I know you guys don't know what fisheyes are. It's a little bubble that pulled up, and I didn't see it until I started showing this picture a while ago, but that always makes me crazy. But the crown turned out well. This gal came in with this crown, and she'd had it for 20 years, and she was really a sweet lady. And so I did the crown, and it's not perfect by any means. She came by the lab, and she made the dentist seat it because she said, I don't want him touching this crown because it's way better than that other one. Because I could have put a little more gray and a little more color in that crown and made it look better, but it looks pretty good because it blends in. I call it the camouflage effect. I build a lot of color in like Barrett does. Barrett and Blake have both been a lot of my friends that are known all over the world for doing porcelain work, and it's where I learned from. So it's one of those things where if you put a guy out in the woods with a white t-shirt, he stands out like a sore thumb. Put 2 colors on him, he starts blending in. By the time you start putting 3 and more colors, none of our crowns have less than 15 powders in them. Our posteriors might have 5 to 7, but we use a lot of colors in them because it helps them blend in better with the adjacent dentition. This is another one, and this is always a big factor. Patient came in, and I got a 10 millimeter wide space with number 8 being 8 millimeters wide. And if a good technician knows how to use line angles, and this is going through the shade again just so you can see. A good technician that knows how to use line angles, that was something my dad taught me, and I told my kids. My dad could make a brick look like a tooth in like 2 seconds, boy. He knew how to contour, boy, that's for sure. When I started building with a brush, he said I was going to put us out of business. He used to use a spatula and just like put that stuff on. That's going back in the old days though, but you can see in black and white it turned out pretty well. Even though it's wide, it doesn't look that bad. And it turned out pretty nice. And even, I don't think anybody would know that person has a crown, and even though it's a little bit wider. But that's using line angles and cutting down on the line angles on the distal to make it look a little bit narrower. Sometimes you need the lap teeth. This gal came in and she had an implant in, and she's got a 6 millimeter wide space when you got an 8 or 9 millimeter wide central next to it, number 9. And I told her, I said, I got to lap your tooth over. I don't want my tooth lapped over. And I said, well, your other tooth's going to be really skinny. Well, I don't want that either. And I said, do you want to do the other tooth? I'm not doing the other tooth. So this is where communication becomes very important, and you got to talk to your patient. So going through the shade again, the abutment. Here's the crown in black and white, of course. It's lapped over the mesial of number 7. And I had to do a lot of talking to get her to accept that, but she loved it. But you've got to communicate, because if I just sent that out to the dentist and put it on and she didn't know ahead of time that it was going to be lapped over, I don't think she would have accepted it, because she was pretty emphatic. This is another single central. Actually, I was trying to match the other central. It kind of matches the lateral and cuspid on that side better. The central now, her natural tooth doesn't look as good as the one, it looks better than one I did, but you can tell that doing centrals is really a challenging thing. That's one of the things that I've taught for a long time all over the country, and nobody wants to do single centrals. I love doing single centrals. I think it's a challenge, and it doesn't mean I get them right all the time, but I think it gives you something to shoot for and keeps my motor going after 40 years. 60 years of remakes. Now I'm gonna kind of smoke through these because I've got quite a few of them. I'm not sure, Rob, did you get to see this presentation when you first put it on? But there's a lot of stuff on this presentation, but it's all fun stuff.
And this this lecture and then the recording will walk through the line and available to download as well.
Lab remakes. We have never had more than a 1% remake factor in 60 years. Blake could attest to that. Blake does all the figures and everything, and we've always strived for that. The national average is still 5 to 7%, which is a lot. And I feel like it becomes our responsibility. Once we accept your work, it's our responsibility. If I call you up and say, we got an impression problem, we got this, I have this all the time where, sometimes you're working on, I remember everybody knows Mike Hoffman. I did a lot of work with Mike, and he would say, Aim, I'm working on Down syndrome kids. You're asking me for a new impression. He said, I'm doing the best I can under the circumstances. That's all I need to hear. But I think it's my responsibility to call you and tell you, I got this. I'm guessing more than 3 millimeters on the margin. Are you okay with what I'm going to do? Yep, got to do what you got to do. And I'm okay with that. I think that's something that Blake and Barrett have a hard time understanding because they're a little more anal than I am. After me doing it for 40 years, I'm a little more cantankerous with things, and I give these guys a rough time. But I understand that we're all trying to make a buck. We're trying to do the best we can, so you just got to move forward. It also is our responsibility to call if we see a problem, and I think that's where boutique laboratories, when we're working with you, with your patient, I think it's really important that we communicate very, very well. The reason I'm showing this is kind of important because I know I've taught to, does anybody know Bonadent Laboratory up in New York? When I was doing classes all over the place, Bruce Bonafiglia, he owns the laboratory. And when I showed him how I would do some of this stuff, and I'm going to show you because it's pretty interesting, the effect liners we use, they're all very fluorescent, which makes the crown look more lifelike. Sometimes when you have a crown with a halo showing through because it's thin, because you prepped as much as you can without pulping the tooth, we got to use stains to cover that up so the halo doesn't come through. The stains are also fluorescent. That's how these are underneath the black light. Everybody at the lab, when I used to do a lot more classes, I don't do as many anymore. I got a big black light and I would run into the bathroom, turn the lights off, and I'd have my camera set up and I would take pictures of all this stuff, which kind of fascinated me. But it shows you what the capability is of a laboratory that wants to do a nice job. What they would do, they'll go the extra step. Because your zirconia, you can see it's dead as a doornail. So we got to bring it to life. And Vita's got some wonderful porcelains that bring all the restorations to life. This is something else important. This was a dentist friend of mine down the street. He sent the patient down, and look at all the white spots. And the mom, when I was taking pictures, the mom said, "He doesn't have those on his teeth." And I said, "What?" "Yeah, his teeth don't look like that." And I said, "Would you come back tomorrow?" "Oh yeah." So she came back tomorrow. Look at overnight, he had chipped his temporary already, but his tooth rehydrated. If I'd have taken a shade and matched that like that, it would have been wrong. So that's why you got to take your shade before the patient ever opened his mouth. If they're coming down for an in-lab shade, they probably should wait a day or two. And you saw this before. This is all the bleaching ones, so I'm not going to spend a second more on that, but it can be very dramatic. Patient expectations. This is another dentist friend of mine. He said, "I'm sending a patient down. She's got crowns from another dentist. I want you to take a look at her and talk to her." And I did. And I thought I was listening to her. So I did these crowns. She hated them. They're terrible. Oh my God, these are the worst crowns I've ever seen in my entire freaking life. And I said, "Were they worse than the first ones?" "No, they're not that bad, but they're just as bad." And they were in temporarily, so it's fine. So I did them again. And you can't tell me those don't look like crap, right? Oh crap. But that's the problem with me not listening to the patient. You've got to listen to your patient, because you know what I think is good for the patient is not good for the patient. So you got to be very careful. Anytime you have, is this the same one? Oh my God. I remember this patient didn't look anything like this movie star, just so you know, but that's exactly what she wanted to look like. So I tried listening really carefully, and this is what we came up with, and she loved them, and they're okay crowns. They're not, she didn't go crazy, go stark white, but when you have patients walking in with pictures from magazines, you better, ding, 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 you better get your things going, because it's going to be a problem, that's for sure. This is another one. This is actually a dentist friend of mine's wife, and I was in the shade room with her, and he was outside, and he said, "Don't you be picking that," and he's talking to me, "don't you be picking that 0-on-1 shade guide." And she looks at me, she goes, "I will snip off your body parts if you don't do exactly what I want." Didn't have to tell me that twice. And he sold so many cases in his office with this picture that he's got on his wall, and I'm like, you know what, don't argue with it. So. And you know who that is, Barry, right? Oh my gosh. Please don't do this to your lab, or if you do, make sure, this really should have been a PFM type restoration for the covering up post. Ivoclar makes there's probably a plethora of them out there now. They make a white opaque. Please opaque out these posts, because any porcelain fused zirconia restoration is going to have a gray line down the center. It just reflects through. So you've just got to make sure you do it. Make sure you're taking a prep shade, because a prep shade is very, very important. I can tell you, porcelain fused zirconia emits some kind of an ion that promotes good tissue health. It also reflects plaque, calculus, all the fun things in life. PFMs will collect all that crap, and a porcelain fused zirconia is a very good restoration, so I always promote those all the time. I bet I haven't done 5 PFMs in the last year. I mean, rarely. We've been an all ceramic laboratory for over 10 years. I mean, it's just been it's just a great restoration. But get the shade. This is the same one that I showed you about my pros buddy, but you can see the difference in the copings on the underlying copings, how it affects it. They're 4/10 thick, and I always make them thin because I can build a lot of porcelain on them and make them look nice. Nowadays, we're making the linguals more zirconia, so the working surface is all in zirconia, which makes them a little more bulletproof, 1200 megapascals. Patient came in and says, "Are my crowns going to look like this?" And I called up the dentist. I said, "I got to make some temporaries, because I don't know what I could do with this." And because this is a tough case. When you've got crowded teeth like that, because you're taking impression off the existing teeth for the temporary, which is great. But send an impression to your lab with some preps, or maybe even do a wax up beforehand. That would even be a better idea, because sometimes you just can't do things like you want or like the patient wants, because now patient expectations can be out the wazoo. Does anybody see anything wrong with this case here? It's just a temporary. Anybody point out anything at all? I'm sorry? Very good, Bob. This patient was emphatic that the gingival crest height should be the same. And I said, well, that's the way God made you. I said, otherwise you got to go to a periodontist. What's that cost? I haven't got a clue. Got to talk to your dentist. And it's probably $1,000 for a crown lengthening. Is that right, or am I mistaken? No? But it's very important that you point these things out. And I probably do it way too much, because I got a patient in a chair and I'm pointing things out. I know they're going home at night and they're going crazy because I pointed out things they probably didn't want to know, but I feel like it's still my responsibility to tell them things that they don't know, so when they get the crown, they know what they get. Pictures of temps, I mean, you want to have the vertical, horizontal. That's very important, because you don't want your teeth to be all sloping. So we've got to have an idea what to do. I love temporaries, because if you get the temporaries in and you take a picture, and if they're straight vertically and horizontally, we're home free. Because we could actually take that, because you'll take an impression of that then, and Barrett could take it back and he could do what's called a double scan, and we could start with that, and we could do cutbacks on it, but we know the vertical and the horizontal is pretty close to where we want to be. So just watch that. That's very important, because we don't have the patient's lips at the laboratory. Probably should sometimes. This is also something very important. When a patient comes in like this and wants to do a bunch of crowns, you better figure out what's going on first, because function always is first, because aesthetics will follow function. If you put some brand new veneers in, within 2 weeks they're going to be chipped to pieces if you've got this kind of stuff going on. So you got to find out what's going on before you start prepping teeth or sewing what you don't know exactly is going to happen. I don't know what causes it all sometimes. Sometimes I think all you know that I always watch cuspal guidance, disillusion of the posterior teeth. You know, it's the old Dawson thing, which I've done. Barrett and Blake have both been to Dawson, and we watch that very carefully. But when you start getting things like this, we've got more than just cuspal guidance problems. Tooth shape. It's much more important than everybody realizes. If you put a square tooth in somebody that's got round teeth, it'll stick out like a sore thumb. So just kind of pay attention to that. You know, if you're doing a single central, we just match a single central. If we're doing a lateral, we match the other lateral. So you just match the contralateral type case. But if you're doing 6 teeth, you take pictures and the patient's got square teeth, we probably should keep that going to some degree, because that's what looks natural and that's what God gave the person. And talking to the patient helps a lot. I mean, always on women's teeth, I try to round off all the distal line angles and soften the teeth more, because it makes them look a little more soft and more feminine. Men's teeth, I make a little more squared off, and I like the way that looks. But that's just me. But you got to talk to your patient. Are you matching crowns or veneers or natural teeth? That's a very, very important thing, because I got to tell you, the hardest thing to match is some other crazy dental technician's build. Dental technicians are all nuts. We can't help it. So when you're trying to match somebody else's build, it's really, really hard. And you almost always need pictures, because some guys build with 2 powders. Some guys build with 3 powders. If we're putting 15 powders on a build, it'll never match the other crown. So we've got to know this stuff. And usually you can tell when you got a crown too. This is kind of important too. If you pick let's say you pick a 3M1 shade, and you tell me, hey, this is kind of an opacious looking shade, I know not to use a lot of translucency, or a lot of, or another 15 powder build. I got to back off and watch things. You almost would want to have the patient come in for a shade on some of these. This one in particular, this is the hardest tooth in the world to match. I flew out to Monterey, California. Naoki Iba, he's been my friend for 25 years. That's where Barrett took a lot of classes too. Naoki spent 4 days with me, and he said there is no measurement for translucency anywhere in the world. They can't do it. The other ones you can measure. I mean, dent and plus incisal, a dentinous shade would be more of a dent thing, but translucency is really, really a hard shade to match. So just bear that in mind when you're taking shades. And the other thing is about if you have natural dentition, do they even have a incisal edge? The one on the right, the top one, is very simple. The one on the bottom, it's got the halo effect, which looks very nice. And if you don't put it in there, it won't look as well, that's for sure. It might still blend in, but we need to know these things, and pictures are great for that. Anatomy, that's probably one of the most important things too. If I put a tooth in and put my anatomy like I like doing, and you got a flat tooth, it's not going to match as well. It reflects the light differently. Glossy, matte, natural look. That's important too. Sometimes a matte finish could be from a patient having their mouth open. Their teeth have just dried out a little bit, but it's always good to know if you've got a glossy 3M1. Phonetics is really important. I've had patients come in with temporaries and they'd be lisping, and I'd say, were you lisping before you got the temporary? Oh no. We probably need to address that before we make the final crowns. I've had to work with Joe Shea a lot with some of those kind of cases. And it's kind of fun to learn that sometimes the cingulum can be too big or not big enough. I mean, it just depends, but you really got to watch very carefully. And these pictures are not helpful. Don't waste your time. If you have to, I mean, it's great to try and make a picture, but they're just confusing. And this is all we need in the laboratory, is technically only 3 pictures if you can. 3 shade tabs, one lighter, one closer, one darker, one to the tooth that you're actually matching. If you're doing this lateral, I'd like to see a picture of that lateral, but you could take another of the whole thing, and then of course your prep shade. That's more information than you could imagine that we need. This is not helpful. Don't waste your time for 20 minutes trying to write all that stuff down. That'll just make us crazier. This was, patient came in, a dentist friend sent her down. She was missing her crown already. She sits in a chair, and the first thing she said, well, this is my 3rd dentist. That's a red flag. So I made the crowns, and I thought they were okay. You know, she came back in, she hates them, and you know why she hated them? The gingival crest height of number 7 wasn't as high as number 10. So he had to cut them all off. Preps were good, impression was good, everything was fine. It's a crazy patient. And I can tell you, I am not proud of these, but she loved these crowns. It's kind of like the other gal. There's no, and you know what she said? I got a picture in my shade, actually a bunch of pictures in my shade room, but it's got the nice translucency around it, and she stands up, she goes, I don't want that shit on my teeth, the incisal edge. And she said it just like that. Don't have to tell me that twice, so I just built them with like a den shade, and she loved them. So it's just a matter of communication and getting things done. Sorry, Rob, this probably can't go on. You're not going to be able to put this on your website. I should not be cussing anymore, I promise. I just saw that just... This gal came in 3 weeks before her wedding and wanted to do all her teeth, and I refused to do the case. Is there any orthodontist here? I wish Jonathan was here, because I think it's probably an orthodontic surgery type thing. I think. And when the dentist got mad at me and she wouldn't work with me after this, and I said, there's nothing I could do with this. There's nothing I could do with it. So, and I'm glad you guys are saying the same thing, right? I'm not too crazy? Okay. So Bear, so if you ever see this kind of stuff, you just have to know. Sometimes Blake and Bear think I'm just too hardcore, and I'm not hardcore. I'm just trying to be honest with people, that's all. Sometimes people don't want to do all four or 6 teeth. 7 and 8 are my crowns, and I put the abrasion, the erosion, or what would you call it? I guess erosion, I guess it was what it'd be, on those teeth to make them blend in, and a gal loved them. They don't match perfectly, but they're pretty darn close. But having the shape and the contours like the other teeth, it makes them blend in a lot more. But you got to talk to your patient. What margin is best for a technician? You know, Bless you. I told Joe Shea the one time when I was out with him, I said, I've probably done 40,000 PFMs in my lifetime, and I probably have. Feather margins were great. We can't do feather margins on the all ceramic restorations. Also in the bottom left, and I've seen that more times than I can shake a stick at, I don't know why they put diamonds on the end of a burr, because they sink that down and go around it like that. That's the hardest thing in the world to pour up and get a crown to fit. It's not going to fit. I've had some students do that down at ATSU, and that's what I've been trying to work with some of them to make sure they understand that, you know, you can do it in enamel, you can't do it in die stone, so you've got to be careful with what you do. Chamfer margins are great. They're probably the best restoration, or the best margin for a restoration on a full porcelain fused zirconia or full zirconia crown. Checking preps. This is what I call razor blades. Razor blades are probably the worst thing in the world. Die stone doesn't like to flow into that, and we try really hard not to. You know, nowadays, since we got the scanners don't touch, so we could probably get away with it a little bit more, except you got a round ball that's going up there, like Bear was showing. You can't mill a point, so it's got to mill all over the place to take care of it. The reason this one is, the ruler is not for measuring the space, it's for measuring, this is the mesial, here's the distal, we got a prep that's sticking way out. And that's one of those kind of cases where I start staining to try and block out the underlying dentition. But if you could just pay attention to your prep sometimes, and I know it's really hard in the mouth to watch that, but when you've got a prep hanging out, that's really hard to work with, especially on a central. Old crowns, office temps, lab milled temps. We mill a lot of temporaries, and I am so glad, because it gives us the idea, the patient gets the idea. We have a working understanding on what the patient likes. If they don't like it, you could grind on them. It's PMMA, polymethyl methacrylate, and they're milled. They're really strong. We've had temporaries in for over a year on some implant cases. Actually, on some old people, I'm actually doing them. I just had Tom Flavin. We did some cases where the patient was like 85 years old, and he goes, "Hey, what's the best thing?" I said, "Why don't we just put a PMMA in there and let it last?" And it's been in there for a long time, too, instead of doing final restorations until whatever happens. But they're great. Bless you. Sorry about that. Milled temporaries are great. You know, everybody might think this is crazy. I still got a bunch of guys that still use these things for clearance. It's 1.5. You can't pull it out if it's less than 1.5. So it just gives you an idea. You know, on the anterior, you probably wouldn't need it as much. That was more for a picture-taking thing that the dentist friend of mine did it for me. But on a lingual cusp, on a number 2 molar, you can't see what you're prepping back there very well. So if you got these things, you know how much you're prepping. It does help a lot. Which is best? If I could go to every office in the country and tell the assistant, you don't need that much material to do a bite. You don't need that much material to bite. That's even more wax than I really need, but I like wax because it doesn't spring. But I mean, I was just at an office the other day, and the gals kept pumping that stuff in there. I'm like, honey, you don't need that much stuff. Just go down the middle of the central fossa and get the patient so you can see where the patient is biting into centric. That's all you need. Attachments. I can't tell you how many attachments I've done. I hate attachments. I'm not talking about ERAs or not ERAs, like locators or anything. I'm talking about, like, my dentist friend wanted me to do an attachment. I said, nope, let me do a parallel coping. And this is a PFM, so you know this is an old picture. I don't do a whole lot of these. We do them in zirconia now, though. We've done some parallel copings. They work great. You could straighten up the axle wall so you get a better draw. Blocking out the underlying dentition. It's something you could do. Even white is better than having a black. I could block out the white a lot easier than I could black out the black. Block out the black. Bad impressions. If you're using a triple tray and you're seeing white plastic anywhere, you're going to have a remake. If you see white anywhere near the margin, you're really going to have a remake. So just pay attention and watch when you take an impression. I love metal trays. It doesn't mean you have to use a metal tray. Triple trays have kind of been a thorn in everybody's side. But they're convenient, they're easy, they work well most of the time on a single tooth, no question about it. Here's an impression. It was a good impression, but there was just a razor blade of material there, and pouring stone into that, it's going to flex a few thousandths. All it takes is 4 thousandths. 4 thousandths is about the thickness of your hair to keep that crown from fitting. So just keep that in your mind too. This is crazy. When a patient bites through it, just take another impression. It'll just save everybody time. Margins are beautiful on it. I mean, if I didn't have to worry about anything else, I could probably do it, but I need something so the bite's not tipping back and forth. This one I just got in the other day. The dentist was like, what the heck is that? And I'm like, well, that's why I'm calling you, because I don't know what the heck it is either. And they finally figured out that the patient had bit their lip when they took the impression, and he didn't notice it until I called him. So we had to get a new impression. This is a friend of mine, great guy up in Ohio. He wears these big magnifier loops. I mean, it's probably bigger than what most of them are. He saw the prep. Prep's great. And he said with the loops, he couldn't see the adjacent dentition the way it looked, so I had to get a new impression because I don't know what the crowns look like, to make a central in particular, so I had to get a new impression. So just pay attention to the adjacent dentition. Another buddy of mine, he's retired now. He used to always pour his models up with that True Stone, which is great stuff. And they're always great models. I could never get the damn things out because they're so sharp. Give me something to get a grip on if you're going to pour up your own. And actually, quite honestly, let me pour them up. I would prefer it because we use an auto mixer that mixes at water powder ratio. Then we put it in a pressure pot to collapse any bubbles that might be there. It's just a better way to do it, that's all. I mean, if you're pouring up an alginate, you got to pour it up, or unless you want to wrap it with a bunch of towels in a Ziploc bag. But for the most part, I would rather be pouring up the models. This is really a big one. This is what I was telling Kate, right? Gail Graziano, I love Gail. I've known Gail for a long time. Her and Sam are probably sitting on the beach up in Italy right now having a ball, but tips, these tips, this is so important that you wouldn't realize. I had a dentist bud that he told his girls that for every 10% you save, you guys will get a bonus. Well, they found the cheapest tips money could buy from Tupelo, Mississippi. I don't know where it was from. But on Impergum, and he had a slew of like 15 crowns that I had to remake. And I told him, I said, there's something wrong. So I called Gail. Gail walks in and she goes, let me see your tips. They get the tips out, and it's a bag of like 150 of them for like $7. I don't know what tips cost, but they got to be more. And she goes, throw them things away and start using my tips again, and everything went away completely, just like that. It's just for information for you guys. This is another good one. Katie. I love metal trays because they don't flex. But this is something that's really important. Well, I don't even have to go over there, but I can tell you. If you're using a sideless tray, you've got to use a heavy body impression material with a light or a medium body. Katie, right? All right. If you're using a sided tray, you can use a medium body with a light body without any warpage. I called up all the impression companies except Katie's because I didn't even know Katie was here. All of them said, all the dentists know that. I called some of my dentist buds and I said, have you ever heard of this? Never heard a word of that. It's not in the instructions. I went through all the instructions, not anywhere in there. When you have a sideless tray, you've got to use heavy body to support it and then a light or a medium body. So just keep that in your mind because that caused some problems. Metal trays are consistently more predictable. I know they're more expensive and I know they can be paid. This system, which I promoted for a long time, Rich, they're not even in business anymore. They went out of business, right?
I think somebody's picked it up.
Really? Because it was really a nice system. And it's been out for like 10 years. What was it, Triogen?
Trios.
Here's another one. See another dentist buddy of mine, and I made this crown intentionally because I wanted to see what would happen. You can see where the arrows are pointing to the plastic. So the old crown fit the model. The new model, it wouldn't fit because it wouldn't fit in the mouth. So it warped enough just to keep the crown from fitting in the mouth, and that's because he bit the tray. All it takes is a little bit of twisting, and of course it twists back, so you never even see it. And you can never see 5,000ths. You couldn't even see 20,000ths probably. So anytime you see a tray that's got a plastic showing, it could be a problem. And if we don't catch it, I'd be shocked. This is something my dad came up with a long time ago. We got on the top left, we got a 3-degree taper on what you turn down on a lathe. He was a machinist in the Navy. He made a sleeve to go on it that fit perfectly. So what we do, and you can see how it fits perfectly in the middle picture. So what we did is we took different impression materials based upon whatever ones our dentists were using at the time, and we would put it in, and we found a die stone that was lower expanding to fit some of the polyethers, polyvinyls at the time. And so you can see over on the bottom left, can you see how it doesn't go down all the way? Cheap die stone, if you have crowns, and I'm going to say from any laboratory, it doesn't have to be a big laboratory, any laboratory, if they're using cheap stone, your crowns are all high because they're using cheap stone. So you've got to watch very carefully, and we've watched that for a long, long time, and we've done that to make sure our die stone, and we spent $1 or $2 for it, matches the expansion for what the impression materials are. And when I talked to Gail about this is going on for a long time, she said nobody knew about that. My dad was really hardcore machinist and hard-headed German too, of course, but it really helped us a lot to understand things. This is something that's really important. I had Akshay and I went round and around, dear old Akshay, you probably saw this about, we can't mill down any farther than this. And that's a no-bell, and that's not only no-bell, and it's not a problem, it's just something you got to be aware of. You've got to sink, whoever's putting your implants in, if any oral surgeons, Rob, you're the only one, right? You got to sink, and that would be on an active. You got to sink it subcrustal to give me, oh, you know that already, so. Not everybody knows that. But to get that emergence profile, so good, glad. Thanks, Rob. Thanks for the good work. No, you're not a know-all. You just know, and which is just great. That's all. But it's very important because I caught a lot of grief from this. I probably shouldn't even show this. This was a crown that kept coming off the top left. It was so thin, so we ended up welding a titanium crown, and I put porcelain on it. It's an ankylose system. I'm not much on the ankylose. It doesn't mean it's a bad system. I just don't like it. Another ankylose system. Anybody in here use ankylose? Thank you very much. And your lab thanks you. I don't even know who your lab is. If you want a silver line down the middle of your crown, that's exactly the way to get it. And that's another buddy of mine that I've gone round and round with him for 20 years. And we have never agreed. Because he always tells me about the bone loss. And I said, I get it. I get it. You don't get bone loss. But I said, my restorative guys and gals, we're just trying to make patients happy. We don't really care about the bone as much as we care about making a patient happy. You know, you're not going to get that much bone loss. I mean, even the old trilobes, they never get that much bone loss on them. This was a case, this was an old military guy, and I loved him to death, and he had a crazy patient in, and we had screw hole coming out. So I think, Bear, I think you did this case, didn't you? Or did I do it? So we had to make a separate crown and seat it separately, but it was a screw retain type implant, full zirconia type implant bridge, and it worked out so nicely. It was a great case. X-ray verification, it's really important. Make sure if you feel like your abutment is not going down, if you keep torquing things down and it's on top of the lip, it's going to fail. So just kind of watch that. Is this a problem? Not for anybody that doesn't care about metal showing, I guess, but I've had to take zirconia down on top of more of these than I could shake a stick at to cover it up so it's down to the tissue, so it looks, at least it looks a little bit like it's tissue borne. But that's a problem. Is that a problem? Think we got a retention issue? And God only knows how deep that margin's got to be 3 millimeters deep, and I'm sure everybody can get the cement out of that. So we got to be careful with those kind of things too. I don't even know if does Nobel even do snappies or that anymore? I don't know if they
sell them, some doctors have got them.
Really?
I think, they always try to run it, but you don't understand why people still use snappies.
No. Yeah. I mean, maybe in a molar region if it's no, not even there. Okay, good. I'm glad you said that, because it's always a problem for the lab guys. See anything can you guys see anything on that? You don't see the screw in there, do you? You know, I was at a periodontist friend of mine, and I saw one of those, and he took the handpiece and went, "Nee," and that screw just kind of came out all by itself. So there's a trick for you. Is that a problem? The patient came in with that in her hand, and the dentist asked me what I thought, and I said, "Did you torque it in?" "No, I just used my fingers." Well, that's a problem. But I was able to, we had to get a new screw, but I put it in the oven overnight at 400 degrees centigrade, and of course the cement vaporizes, so it came apart. But so it wasn't a horror story, but he torqued it in, or she torqued it in at a time, I can't remember, but it can happen. Is this a problem? Open tray impression copings don't like to come out of the impression. If anybody ever has any questions about impression copings, call us, because this is a problem. Getting those back in the impression, that ain't gonna happen. So, Alyssa, what are you laughing for? It's a problem. So you know what's kind of funny? Everybody sits there, and you don't think that we get some stuff, boy, that's for sure. So I always think it's kind of fun. It's kind of an awareness program, just so you see that. Well, I'm thinking that when he took the impression and he took it out, and he sent it to us, and he thought we could just snap it back in. Very good. You know, this is okay. If you've got, I mean, it's not okay, but if you have to grind on impression copings to get them to go in because they're hitting the adjacent teeth or something, grind on them. Who cares? Doesn't make any difference. They're reusable. And if you have to lute them together, you know, actually on a case like this, you would not have to lute these together. I always say 10 millimeter span, and you've got to do a verified impression. I'll show a verified impression a little bit here, but when you start doing screw retained implants and things that need to be really, really accurate, you got to do a verified impression. But you know, if you need to grind on your impression copings because they're hitting the adjacent teeth, grind on them. Anybody see anything there? This is a fun one. This is a really good friend of mine. He was so embarrassed. Anybody see anything? All right, let me point it out. This is really good. He even took an x-ray for me. Anybody see anything at all? All right. You see where the head is, right? You see where the hex is?
Upside down.
It's upside down. See, and I called him and I said, "Steve, it's upside down." "No, it's not." "It's upside down, Steve." And he goes, "Well, it came from the factory like that." Okay, maybe it did. So, closed tray and open tray. I can tell you right now, if I had any preference, they could take the closed tray impressions off the market and I'd be the happiest camper ever. But I'm a realist, and I know back in the molar region, sometimes you can't do an open tray impression. I get that. But what I always tell everybody, if you do a closed tray, do me a favor, grind a line on it or put an F for facial or a B for buccal or some reference. I know that's crazy. They only go in one way, right? Everybody always tells me that. It only goes in one way. I want to put it in the way you had it in. I don't care. Because if I ever have problems, it's always a closed tray impression coping. Always. It's never the open tray because it doesn't come out of the impression. Unless like that last picture that you saw. Can this be a problem? See down in where the closed tray impression coping is? You see where the hex was? I know that's only like 1.5 millimeters. When you put the impression coping in, if you don't get it exactly like that hex, it's going to bounce up a little bit. It's going to make your crown fit a little different. I know I'm being crazy German, but just put a little wax on the top of your closed tray impression before you take the impression. That's all. Do screwdrivers wear out? You better believe they do, boy, that's for sure. And these companies want to sell them because they're $75 a piece, so be careful with them. But don't be using a 4.8 and a 5.0. It'll wear out a lot faster. But when you start getting the tips to wear off on them like this up here, either grind it off, which I do at the lab sometimes. You can grind them off and get a little more life out of it, but they will wear out. So just pay attention to that because you will strip off a head of a screw. And then you got a problem. Actually, Barrett and I were working on a car the other day, and I showed him, I said, we had Well, this is really a sidebar. We were putting rotors on the car, and the little screws that hold the rotors on, they were all stripped. And I told Barry, I said, we're going to drill those out. And he goes, what? And I said, it's just like an implant. He said, you just got to drill the head off so the implant comes off, and then the screw will come right out. It's exactly what we did. And he's like, well, I never saw that before. Oh my God, this is from Yukon. They didn't do a verified impression. They knew we had a laser welder, argon laser welder. We ended up laser welding the snot out of things and charged an arm and a leg for it. It probably would have been cheaper to have a new bar. No, it wouldn't have, I know. But this is where you have to have a verified impression on multi-units or multiple units when you're bolting them in. This is a verified impression in the mouth. And this is the most accurate thing you could ever do. If you're doing a 3-unit bridge and it's spanning more than 10 millimeters, you almost always have to do a verified impression. If we're doing custom abutments, I could probably make the tolerances or the die spacer a little more to give it a little wiggle room. But if you're doing screw retain, and everybody's on screw retain now, if you're doing screw retain implant crowns, like 2 crowns splinted together on a bridge with a ponic in between, it'll never fit. Even if we use non-engaging, a lot of implant companies now aren't making the non-engaging tie bases or their implants, and I don't understand that, because if you do a bridge, you've got to have non-engaging. You don't need any indexing on a bridge because it's not going to go anywhere. So you need non-indexing. But the verified impression, it's fail-safe, and it works very, very well if it's done right. This is not the right way to do a verified impression. Triad's great, or composite's great, but you've got to make sure you're around all the different impression companies. Those are temporary titanium abutments, which is a great way to do it if you have to, but you got to make sure that you get it luted together right. Am I taking up? Are we good on time, Rob? Okay. And can everybody see what's going on here? I always like these. These are kind of fun ones for me. All right. This is great. The next slide's on it too. Okay, so we get the impression in. Katie does the soft tissue, and all the soft tissue is flowing inside the analog. What does that usually mean? Because it's bolted down, you know. So it's not sealed. Why is it not sealed? Because somebody was banging them out of the model to save themselves 30 bucks and whacked it. You can use them over. Just be careful when you're whacking them out, that's all. It happens all the time. I mean, all the time. And whenever I tell somebody you got bent analogs, no, I don't.
Yes, just FYI, we give the coating in analog at no charge, so don't.
But you can knock them out if you want. I mean, if you want to save 30 bucks, but just don't whack them, that's all. All right, stock abutments. I haven't done a stock abutment in 10 years. I'm just telling you that I'm sure there's a place for them. When you start getting subgingival, I don't think there's a human being out there that shouldn't be customized. That's just my opinion. I think stock abutments are great. You know, and quite honestly, everybody nowadays knows that you don't fill up the whole freaking crown with cement and you just put it around the axle wall. So you could probably get away with some of this sometimes, but I just don't think it's a good end result. So that's my opinion. I mean, there's a lot of opinions out there. They do sell a lot of stock abutments still. Here's another one of the snappies, I think it is, but look at on the mesial of that, how deep that margin is. If guys and gals like you guys that know that if you just put the cement around the outside, you're probably fine. But when I can't tell you how many offices I've been to where the dentist is working and they go to grab the crown, and I see the crown and the cement's clean to the top, man. And I would always say, why don't we take some of that out? Okay, how much? Like all of it? Like, you know, so. This is a periodontist friend of mine, and he was gracious enough to let me have this, and which is wonderful. These are all stock abutments. It's a laboratory that clearly didn't understand what happens, and all you guys and gals all know what we got here. We got a piece of cement that went down to sulcus. Look at the bone loss. Holy tamale. Think you're worried about a millimeter or two? We got some dangerous stuff there. So cement is or could be a problem. Like I say, the awareness thing, I think it was Pinaro, and who was the other guy that did that class at one time? Were you here, Rob? You might not have been here then. they were probably the best class that Nobel ever put on, talking about this kind of stuff and how 7 years from now, how all these implants are going to be a problem from cement being hydraulically forced down into the sulcus. So that's what can happen, and that's frightening. Bad angle, you got to have a custom abutment. You're not going to have a good emergence profile, or not emergence, to put the crown in. I just went brain dead. You know, thank you very much, Allison. Path of insertion, because it just doesn't work. Screw retain. These are two of Barrett's crowns he did a long, long time ago. And screw retain crowns are great for vertical dimension when you have no vertical dimension on it at all. And it makes for a great restoration. I will tell you, in my opinion, that ladies don't like, on lower teeth, they don't like screw retain crowns, because you know what they got? They got a white dot in the middle of the crown. They don't like that. And you guys have heard me say this before, where I've had girls with the mirror up so close, looking at things and criticize things like, I got to tell you right now, if anybody's that close, they're not worried about your crowns anymore, or your teeth. Is this a problem? And what it is, you got an air gap around. I could take the analog and move it all over the place. You've got to make sure that you've got it in good. And please don't use blue mousse for an impression. Somebody somewhere in the world came up with a great idea about using impression material. I've got a dentist friend that still does it. And he swears it was the best technique ever to use blue mousse and then use light body for the impression. That's nuts. But you can't take an impression with this stuff, for God's sakes. It doesn't work, so. Oh. It's just, life is fun as a lab tech sometimes, you know. These are all good for phone calls, though. And you know what? What's great, now I sit with my, Barrett, how many times do I take pictures during the day and send pictures to dentist friends? Because I don't have to get my camera out, do the whole thing, and then load it. I just text it to them, and they get it right away, and I get a call really quick, and it's great. So communication has increased. I've kind of learned to work with ATSU. All the young kids all love texting. I hate texting. My thumbs are too big. But it's just a great way to communicate when you get something like that. And like, oh, okay, what do we do now? Oh. This is some implant system. I don't even know what company it was, Barry, do you remember? It was in 8 languages. And Barrett was on the phone for 45 minutes trying to talk to somebody, and there was no support anywhere to be found. So it was, you know, it's kind of nice. We've got some great local reps that really help us a lot, and use them. That's what they're there for. It's great to have a foreign implant, and I'm sure they cost about $37 for the fixture and analog and impression coping, but you get what you pay for. So creating an emergence profile. This, you know, on anterior crowns, this is probably the best thing anybody could do. I've learned that with some of the periodontists I worked with, and it works great. General dentists could do it too. It's not a problem, and you guys could work. Which I didn't know, and I don't know if I was talking to you, Rob. I was talking to somebody about making an emergence profile or making impression copings. I said, how long does it take for that tissue to collapse? Like a minute or two? Oh no, you know, like 30 seconds, and it's already starting to collapse in. So, and I didn't know it happened that fast. So you've got to be able to figure out how to make the emergence profile, but boy, in an anterior case, that's slick. And that's been going on for a long time, of course. Veneers, I used to do a lot of platinum foil veneers. Blake and Barry both wanted to get back into it, and I said, I'm not doing them. Because it takes 8 firings on them. It takes a lot of work. I charge an arm and a leg for them. These are platinum foil veneers. They make drop-dead gorgeous veneers. We had one of the younger guys that Barrett works with really closely that we did some for, and they look beautiful, but they take a lot of labor for them. So I try to avoid them. But I think it's important to know that there's a lot of things out there that we used to do that were very labor intensive, and you know, with the milling machines and the scanners, it's helped all of us for sure. No prep veneers, great place for those. Young person, a dentist friend of mine that did it. Vita actually made a poster out of this because they thought it was really slick because they had seen it. It was, I call it a taco shell because it kind of slides down on the side of the tooth. It's not perfect, but boy, it sure worked well. So there's things we could do. If you need help, you just got to call and talk to us. That's all. Same thing with the placement. If they're hanging out, you just got to do the best you can under the circumstance. I mean, strictly, Nobel has their what do they call the new one, the angle one? ASC. It only goes 20 degrees. It's probably okay. I think they thought it was the answer to all. It's not. A custom abutment can go much more of an angle, and we can do a lot better job with a custom abutment. So just keep that in mind on some of these cases. And also communication is very important for us to contact you and make sure that we know what we're doing and we're on the same page. Emergence profile. I used to call these popsicle sticks because they would come out and then he had the 90-degree emergence profile, because I've had dentist friends of mine that don't want to work with tissue, and so what you have is you've got to have a 90-degree emergence to get something to look okay, and you can't push on the tissue sometimes. Same thing, this is an impression coping. Look at the impression material. It was probably leaning up against the adjacent teeth and wasn't down all the way, and the dentist couldn't tell, and until we get it into the lab, we saw it, and I said, it looks like it wasn't down all the way. And I always ask if it was x-rayed, and a lot of times nobody really remembers if they x-rayed something or not. But and I just got this the other day. What do you do with that? I actually made a PMMA temporary on that for my friend. It was an old gal, and I don't know what do you do with that? What can you do with it? So I don't know. She's in a PMMA with all the teeth are on the outside, and we just did that not too long ago. But wow, same thing. This is actually the school. Dr. Kruger down at school, and I don't mind saying it because it's not his fault. This came from St. Louis U, is that right, Rob? SLU, right. And when I sent the picture, they're all like, whoa, we didn't see that. This isn't, Rob, this might have been yours in my case that we talked about the one time. When you said, where should I put the implant? And I said, put it right in the middle.
Yeah, that was one of the questions for like lower implication in the middle or on the side. I mean, actually, we kind of, so yeah.
I think, and actually, it might not be yours, I'm not sure for sure, but
I had brought up that question was the best place to put it prosthetically.
I think yeah, you'd call me on the phone one day, and I think you're in the middle of surgery. I said, put it in the middle. I do it all the time, and it's okay. I just don't like cantilevers on Pontics or on implants. That's just because I'm weird and I overbuild things being German. So I always feel like if you have equal strain on each side, and it turned out very nicely actually. Seating guys, I've been doing these for over 10 years, and everybody I do them for, they love them. Some guys and gals don't want them because they're really well versed and they don't feel like they're important, but man, they could sure save you a lot of time when you have multiple units, that's for sure. Materials, okay, we're going to run through this. How much are we doing okay on time? Are you guys okay? Because there was a lot of slides in there, I know, and I really apologize, but it was something important. Milled, pressed, cast, layered, why, when, and where. And I'm going to spend a few minutes on this, maybe not necessarily this slide. There's probably another one after this, I don't know for sure, but if you mill a crown, we're talking 1,200 megapascals. It's probably the strongest restoration, top left, strongest restoration ever. It's got a tie base on it, of course. Chance of failure is almost nil. Will it break off the opposing dentition? You bet. I think the most you can bite on a posterior tooth with natural dentition is like 46 megapascals. So we've kind of gotten crazy in the dental world on strength. But a press crown, I think that's an Ame'S. I think that's what that is. Maybe Barry can help me. But and these aren't great pictures, but it was just for reference. Ame'S are 360 megapascals pressed. So you're talking about a third of the strength of what the zirconia is. Zirconia is a great restoration.
Is that when it's bonded properly or just the
No, that's cemented. Bonded, it's about 600.
Good for you, and that's just where I was going to go with that too, because it's really important to understand nobody bonds them. Maybe you do, John, and I really admire you for doing it. Dan, do you do too? Nobody bonds them. Nobody,
Why would you cement something when you can bond it?
but you got to isolate the tooth.
You know, clean cement that too.
That's true, good point. But you're right, they're a lot stronger if they're bonded.
Are you serious?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I promote zirconium mainly because of the tissue health, because of the the way it emits the ion that deflects things. But Ame'S are prettier crowns and posteriors compared to a full zirconia. They've come a long way with zirconia because now they got multi-layered, which the crowns that Barrett does, they're drop dead gorgeous and they look really good. Obviously a metal crown, metal crown you can wear through them eventually, but you know what? They're still beautiful restorations. I don't care what he says. The problem is with the bottom right crown being gold, you better understand you're going to get a bill for $400+ for a gold crown. That's just the way it is right now. Some patients want them, and you just got to put a surcharge on them. I think you have to, just so they know. Ame'S are great for onlays and inlays. They fit perfectly. They're just a great restoration. Aesthetics versus strength versus cost. So what you've got is you've got 1200 megapascals on the full zirconia type crowns. That's a titanium crown. We can't even get those anymore. I don't think. Does Argent even mill those anymore, Bear? I don't think they do they? Yeah, Nobel used to mill titanium full cast crowns. They don't do that anymore. The molar crowns, if they're stained right, they can look pretty darn good. Layer crowns, 2 centrals, you're never going to find, in my opinion, a better or more aesthetic restoration than a porcelain fused zirconia type crown. The lingual is going to be zirconia, so you have the 1200 megapascals of strength, and the facial's got porcelain on it, so you get all the aesthetics with it too. The thing about a layered crown, like in the old days, we used to always have PFMs. PFM, the weakest link with the PFM is the opaque to the metal. That's 120 megapascals. So the new restorations we got, they're 10 times stronger than a PFM. In my opinion, we shouldn't be doing PFMs anymore unless you absolutely have to. That's just my opinion. It doesn't mean they're bad restorations. I just think the zirconia ones are by far superior. My opinion. Implant crowns don't have to look like implant crowns. We've done some really nice restorations. These were just first place. You can see it's blanched in the tissue a little bit, but once the tissue heals around them, implant crowns can look pretty darn good. They're probably the best thing ever. It's so much better than doing a 3-unit bridge, unless the patient insists they want a 3-unit bridge. In-lab shades. This is a dentist friend of mine, his nephew, and he had some pretty beat up teeth. And the end result turned out very, very nicely. And I just think that an in-lab shade gives the laboratory technician a lot of information, a lot more information than what you guys and gals can give us, even with pictures. Naoki would argue with me about that because he does work all over the world and he gets a lot of pictures, but he gets $2,000 for a single central. He gets $2,000 for a single central. I don't think I'm going to live long enough to get that kind of a price for any of my crowns, that's for sure. But the in-lab shades can really give me a lot of information. The other thing that's very important to understand is the temporaries are flat across. These aren't our temporaries, but this young lady had kind of triangular type teeth, so I made the centrals a little more triangular, and they blended in really nicely. So us following the natural anatomy of the teeth and the contours and everything makes things look really natural. If I'd have made my crowns look like the temporaries, they wouldn't have looked near as good, that's for sure. So, wow, you guys made it the whole time with me. That's pretty good. Any questions? Did I bury you in a lot of stuff that I hope was a little bit helpful? There's probably thanks Dan, I appreciate that. There's probably a lot of things, thanks you guys very much. Probably a lot of things you guys have probably seen before, I'm sure, but sometimes it's just more of an awareness program to let you know we see a lot of things. I mean, we see a lot of things. And if I could give it to you and you've got it in your head somewhere, hey, that crazy lab guy told me about this stuff, so it could be helpful. Yeah, thanks for being here. Katie, why don't you come up?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm so glad she's here. I didn't even know this company existed, so I'm so excited about this because I got my new Gail Graziano.
Yeah, this is a beautiful thing, honestly. So yeah, honestly, I really am so thankful for you.
Is that Eddie?
Really
Yes.
cool.
Oh.
Yeah,
Oh.
I've worked in clinical industry for years. I was an assistant and I had a dentist, so I understand the challenges that can come with really trying to narrow down the processes and the products that we're using and everything to get the best results that we can possibly get for our patients. And so that's why I'm so thrilled to be able to work with a company who here is using it currently? Okay, so tell me about your results, guys. Like, I mean, are you happy with?
I mean, like Amos can vouch for it because I just tried a new tray because I was trying to decide between the blue or the orange, and I sent one to him and he loved it. So that's all
Great.
the-
Yeah.
the
Very, very
that I use.
precise. I mean, it
That's
looked
the whole
great.
thing. It's German engineering is a real thing. I mean, they've been doing it since 1944. The results, because it is the mouth is a moist environment, so because it's hydrophilic, the detail that we can get is just staggering, and especially because we're cutting out the middleman, we're just bringing it to you. It's the price of the client too. So if you're interested, if you want to see the results that we can deliver, I've got a great promotion going on right now. It's kind of like a little sampler fighter. Please stop by my table. Let's let me know, get y'all signed up. We can kind of customize it to whatever your needs are, and we can go from there. Okay? Any questions? No? All right, come see me. Excellent.
Great. What did I do? Oh, got to stop.